Hi everyone, welcome to the Menu Mix with me, Matt Holy.
And me, George Wetz. Now on the Menu Mix, what we do is we look at a different leading restaurant's menu every week and we reveal to you some of the psychological tricks and the operational considerations that have gone in to making that restaurant's menu so great. And what we do is we look at it through the lens of a ACE framework, the ACE framework, where we look at the aesthetics, the composition, and the execution that has gone into the design of that menu. Now this week we are very excited. We're going to be looking at a restaurant called Abba.
Abba. Great spot. Great spot
in Austin and a couple of other spots around the US and part of a bigger group. So we'll get into that in a moment. But before we do, Matt.
If you like these videos and find them insightful, if you could please, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it and it really helps the channel out.
Nice one. So let me tell you a bit about Abba. It's actually part of a much bigger group called Let Us Entertain You, who run about 60 brands actually over about 130 locations. Been going since 1971 when a founder and his mentor met and they together started their first restaurant, and it's been a family-owned business ever since that for, what's that, like 50 years now. They've just celebrated their 50th anniversary together.
Big one.
And so that's awesome. And what makes this group really special is, 60 brands and 130 odd locations. So they focus on having lots and lots of brands with different concepts and generally a bit higher end concepts as well. So it's going to be a bit different for us today, where we're going to look at the more high end premium part of the market and also not just look at the food, but also get into a bit of drinks on the menu.
Beverage list. They've got a great one, so looking forward to it.
Now, before we get started, Matt, what does Abba mean?
Mamma mia, I don't know.
You're actually very close with
really?
that.
Is it an Abba reference?
Very close. No, it's Abba, A-B-A, and it means father in Hebrew.
Okay.
And that's because this restaurant concept has got a real Mediterranean influence, but with a kind of California twinge on it as well. So
cool.
That's why it's called Abba. Okay, so let's get into it. We're looking at the overall, all of the menus here, and I'm going to zoom in, and we can first start to take a look at the food menu. So Matt, what do you want to call out first?
Yeah, so compared to a couple of the other menus that we've looked at thus far, you'll see this one is a lot cleaner. There's no use of color. It's just kind of black and white and sleek. So focusing on just like why they would have chosen to make the menu look like that in the first place, it's definitely higher end. It evokes luxury. There's no distractions on the menu. So when these menus are really clean and just like neat, it evokes higher end.
And there's some other things to expect just from this kind of menu. So on the descriptions of the meals, for example, rather than having a sort of marketing spiel with it, they're just calling out the ingredients in it to give it that feeling of, it's been really created from these ingredients from the kind of the ground up.
Yeah, that's right. So one thing that is important to consider when looking at this menu is this is actually designed to be like a tapas style restaurant. So instead of listing out all of the menu offerings in terms of like starters, main course, dessert, they actually from right to left on the menu listed it out in terms of temperatures. So you have all the kind of cold shareables all the way on the left hand side. Then you get into the Mediterranean butchers block kind of highlighted there in the middle. So these are some of the dishes that you could see there's just an extra line there really highlighted right in the middle of the menu because these are the dishes that they really want you to order. And then getting into some of the hot meze, seafood and kebabs as well. So not only is this kind of in terms of temperature, but this is also likely how the dishes would come out from the kitchen, starting from cold and then gradually getting hotter as the meal goes on.
And because it's very simple, they haven't had to do a lot to call out the things they really want you to order. So a couple of visual devices here. There are 3 dishes they really want you to have on this menu. That's this crispy short rib hummus, this house-made stracciatella, and this Greek frozen yogurt here. So we've got these 3 menu items. They're saying if you're going to just have 3, please have these 3. And then the premium part of the menu, this Mediterranean butchers part here, you can see they've just this very classy sort of double line element here, just to kind of make it really stick out, and it goes through the actual title to that category as well. So very, very simple. That's all they got to do, and you're kind of away, and you start selecting from one of these beautiful mezze dishes.
Yeah, that's right. And as well, I mean, even though it's really clean and listed out, they did do a good job of not overwhelming you with choice. So they did apply the rule of 7. You could see each category has, you know, between 3 and 6 items listed there. So this doesn't kind of overwhelm you with choice. Again, kind of you focus on the category, it gives you a really easy way to filter down, and it just kind of gives the guests an easy way to say, oh, I'm going to choose one from this, one from this, one from this, one from this. And that's kind of the whole idea of how they laid out their tapas menu.
Now, Matt, in a previous episode of the Menu Mix, we discussed pricing. And what we discussed on pricing was how many digits you can use or should use in different contexts when it comes to pricing your dishes. And very, very interestingly,
it is very interesting.
Menu,
yeah.
Every single menu item on this menu, all of them, ends in the number 95. Just here. As you see, 95, 95, 95 everywhere. So they're bringing in that psychology of being just under, they're not doing the 99, but they're coming in just under that kind of, that the dollar number that would be above. And we're having a bit of a kind of discussion as to why that might be, or why you might want to use this technique earlier.
Yeah, well, in the premium dining space, you would expect actually whole numbers. There is some research that evokes that people expect from higher end restaurants just to have the single digits. That actually in and of itself heightens the expectation and like the perception of the meal that the guest is about to have. But this 0.95, I think as well, they're speaking to maybe a different demographic. They get very busy for lunch as well. So they're doing a really fine job of balancing that kind of premium element, which we'll discuss a little bit later on when talking about the beverage list, with some kind of value perception offerings with the way they've laid out their food in the menu.
Now, the other thing that's interesting about the pricing on this menu is if you actually scan down in each column here, you'll notice that every column starts with the lowest price item and takes you all the way down to the highest price items. That's in every single menu, every single column on the menu here. And that's quite unusual. Like, more often you'd be used to kind of seeing those mix and matched in, or you might have some anchor dishes at the point where the eye is drawn to naturally on the page. But here they've decided to actually list those out all the way along. And we were kind of having a discussion as to why that might be. Do you want to kind of pick up on that?
Yeah, so as you referenced, a very common technique in menu engineering is having that anchor dish, which often is the most expensive dish on the menu. You want the eyes to see that one first, so that every other dish in comparison seems like good value, seems a little bit cheaper. If you do the other way around, the guest might be scanning the price that they want to pay and stop once they've kind of reached the limit. So it is interesting that they chose to do this. However, they did it in a way that makes it a little more difficult for the eye to intuitively just scan. So that's where you'll notice that each of these columns are centered instead of the prices being like a clean line down in listed form. So even though it is listed in terms of price from low to high, the effect from doing that gets mitigated by the fact that it's actually centered and it's not easy to scan. And because of that, you don't even really notice the prices. So it is kind of an interesting technique that they did, even though it's not necessarily what some menu engineers would say.
Yeah, it actually took us a while to kind of notice that. We just before we got on the show, we're like, oh, hold on a minute, this is what they've done to make that. So as Matt says, you're not scanning down and looking at the most expensive item as you go to the bottom. There's another section here we wanted to call out, which was the dessert section.
That's right, yeah.
And what's interesting about this dessert section is, in fact, the whole menu is a bit more geared towards this. Isn't a really rich and saturated and full flavors kind of heavy like menu. There's a lot of fresh ingredients. There's a lot of unusual ingredients, and that's really shone through into the dessert section. So whilst yes, you do have your chocolate cake, which is what I would order on the menu, if you look at the other items, they're all at least got the perception of being lower calorie, a bit lighter. So we've got our Greek frozen yogurt, honey pie, and they're highlighting first ingredient grapes. We've got sticky date cake highlighting dates, highlighting pistachios, again highlighting grapes here. So they kind of seem to be using these items to give this perception that the desserts maybe aren't so calorific, and so maybe you'd want to choose one of those in addition to all of your nice meze you've got.
Yeah.
And also by having the desserts on the main menu, you know, we know this restaurant is very big, it's very busy, and so there's a bit of a execution consideration we think might have gone into why they've done that.
Yeah, so especially in the fine dining or higher end setting, there are some studies that have said if you actually make the dessert menu separate, you could get up to 9% increase in your average check. Now, there is a big caveat to that. It has to be not a super hectic kind of service environment where you know, you could take your time and you know for sure that every single server is giving that table the dessert menu. If even a handful of tables don't get that dessert menu, well, you're definitely not going to get that dessert sale. So because of the size of the restaurant and because of how busy it is, it's always packed. It's like hard to get a table there sometimes, honestly. This is a way to just guarantee that, yeah, the guests have a chance to look at the dessert and consider it, even though in some higher end settings, you might have that separate dessert menu altogether.
Well, enough about all this food, Matt. Let's have a drink. So for the first time on the menu mix, we're going to be looking at the drinks menu of ABBA because it's really interesting, and they've not only got some interesting elements around the different categories on the menu and the reasons behind that, but also how they've done premiumization of certain products there as well. So first thing I want to call out is it's a booklet style, as you might expect, but when you get straight into it, the first section you actually see is 0 proof cocktails.
Yeah, really interesting.
This is speaking to health conscious, or the growing trend in people who are not drinking alcohol, particularly younger generations, Gen Z, but there's an overall decrease in the amount of people that are drinking alcohol out every single time. Maybe they want, if it's a midweek, they want to stay off alcohol. So I think it's increasingly important for restaurants to be considering what the adult style drinks that are non-alcoholic are. And I don't just mean kind of having sodas on the fountain. People want to go and they want to see that you've thought about catering to the non-alcoholic audience. I can speak for my wife in particular. When we go to a restaurant and they have actually called out that we can make you these nice non-alcoholic cocktails, she's much more likely to ask them to order one of those. And if you look at the pricing, there's no alcohol in there, but it's still $10 for one of these drinks. So they're extracting quite a large amount of Czech dollars from someone just by having them on there. And if they weren't on the menu, but you could make them anyway, some guests might not just draw that link to it being there. So I think it's really interesting. They've straight away called that as their first drinks category.
Yeah, and often on these cocktail lists, you'll actually see the 0 proof cocktails, but just kind of like tucked away in the corner in kind of the menu Siberia, if you will, and it very much feels like an afterthought. So really interesting that they've made it front and center. This is actually the beverage list, especially booklet style. The eyes will scan it like a novel. So this is the first place that guests are going to be looking at. And this is a really important call to action to say that this is something we actively focus on in our cocktail program. It's not an afterthought. So these are going to be really, really tasty cocktails.
And then getting to the actual cocktails, they've got 2 sections broken out here. So this section called cocktails, which you will notice are slightly lower priced, and then the section called reserve cocktails. And they've got more higher premium spirits in them. And you'll see that the price difference between these is sort of in around, what, $7-8 difference, so almost 50% more in terms of pricing. But Matt was pointing out to me earlier a very smart way that they've done this to encourage people to order the more premium ones. So what does that matter?
So, a couple of things. One, similar to what they did on their food menu, you could see they've just kind of boxed it on that page. So it just kind of draws the eye a little bit more to the reserve page there. But secondly, if you look at the names in the regular cocktail list and then you look at the names in the reserve cocktail list, you'll see the names in the regular cocktails are kind of fun and not really associated with some of the classic cocktails that guests might be familiar with, whereas all of the reserve cocktails are linked to one of those familiar cocktails that people would know, but just kind of a premium version of it. So when guests go into a restaurant, especially if there's some ingredients in the cocktail that they might not know, or they don't want to try something too new, they tend to default to what they know. And if what they know is what you see here in the reserve cocktail list, they're more likely to go for that one than one of the cheaper cocktails.
And you can also imagine someone going in and going, oh, yeah, I'd like a margarita, and saying to their server, can I have a margarita, please? And the server going, oh yeah, would you like our Oaxaca, Oaxacan A-Mile margarita? And you just go, yeah, sure, that sounds great.
Yeah, old fashioned, same thing. They're just like, I just want an old fashioned. Well, we have this really fancy one. It uses, this bourbon and it's this twist on it, and
you go,
it's a very easy
sounds
upsell.
Great.
Though.
I'll have one of those, please. $23. Thank you very much.
That's right.
Okay, so that's your first section there. The next section we'll move to then is this page here. So before we've got into any wines, there's one more little cocktail section here, which is jovially called groupies, and these are sharers, so they're for 4 to 5 people per cocktail. And so what's kind of interesting about this is they've got 3 different flavors, and if you're in a group, there's a lot of larger groups that might go here for drinks after work or going out in the evening. So it does give people an opportunity to have a slightly lower price point for them to kind of share with their friends, but in a kind of fun, I'm sure it presented in quite a different kind of way.
The fajita
theater,
the fajita effect, where when you walk by with the fajitas, it's sizzling. You hear it. It's a big spectacle. The beverages, they come in these big bowls. Same thing. But what's really interesting about these groupies here is this is actually to help with the complexity of being a bartender. So. Often what will happen when you're behind the bar is, let's say you have a table of 4, everyone orders a drink, you'll get 4 different cocktails sometimes, and some will be shaken, some will be stirred. Maybe they don't all use the same ingredients. So as a bartender, that's really, really tough to time up, and that could set you back pretty quickly if you get a few of those in a row. So having these groupies is a really great way to kind of mitigate that. You're basically batching one big cocktail in this big vessel. It takes you the same amount of time to make as it would, an individual cocktail, or maybe like 1.5. But you're still getting that upsell to every single person on the table is getting the cocktail.
I think it's a really interesting concept when it can be quite difficult to staff the bar, particularly at peak times, and have the capacity for everyone to order their drinks and get them out in a reasonable time. So I think this is a strategy that brands can look to employ to just try and mitigate a bit of that rush, but also providing something a bit extra and a different experience for their customers as well. It's really interesting. Let's look at here. So we've got here, Matt.
Nice little call out.
Chateau
Musar.
To talk about this.
So this is really interesting. Before they even get into any of the list of their bottles, they have a little bit of a story here going into Chateau Musar. They're also, the way they break their wine list out is by ancient world, old world, which is kind of like the France, Italy, Spain, Germany, that type of thing, and then new world, which is US, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, etc. Calling out ancient civilization, there are the oldest wine producers in the world actually aren't from the biggest wine producing countries that you'd think of right now, like France and Italy. They are really these Mediterranean countries like Lebanon, like Greece, like Israel. These are really the originators of wine. So there are still some amazing wineries that I think, especially in the US, people might not know about. So Chateau Mizar specifically is probably the most famous Lebanese wine producer. He's won all sorts of accolades, and the wine every year, it's basically they have a blend, but the blend of grapes changes every year based on what the weather was like and the terroir and what's tasting nice. So every vintage is actually very, very different. And that's where you'll see here, they have several vintages of Chateau Mizar. They're all at different prices, and they're all reflected in terms of, one, how hard is it to get a bottle from that year, but two, some years were better than others, and that is definitely reflected in the price of Chateau Mizar every year. So really, really fun producer to highlight. I think the fact that they are a Mediterranean style restaurant and they're really focusing on Mediterranean wines is kind of fun. You don't see that too much, especially in the US and Canada. So yeah, it's just kind of fun that they're educating the consumer who might be reluctant to spend over $200 on a bottle of Lebanese wine if they don't know a little bit about it. So
you want to know a little bit about what the wine is before you drop $280 on a bottle of wine.
That's right.
You'd expect to know a little bit about the wine.
Yeah,
but you're right, it has the kind of authenticity of the Mediterranean concept of this brand, and I think going right back to the heritage of the the old days of trading on the Mediterranean and this wine being produced, I think is a really clever way for them to have called that out. And as Matt said, this kind of similar device is featured in 2 or 3 other sections on this menu. We're not going to go into all that now, but I think this trend that we're seeing both in kind of beverage and alcoholic drinks, but also in ingredients of calling out the producer and making more of the producer's brand, it then associates your restaurant brand with a premium producer as well. We're seeing that much more often, whether down to meats, vegetables, and drinks and things like that as well. Okay,
great. I think that's everything. It's it was really fun exploring this menu because you look at it on the surface, it's clean, it's black and white. On the surface, you wouldn't think there's a lot of menu design and menu engineering that went into it, but when you really break it down, they did some really, really smart things here.
This is why they have done so well over such a long period of time, and why even though ABBA, the concept itself, is only 3 locations, you can see that there's a huge amount of knowledge and expertise that's gone into the preparation of this menu, and that's why it's such a fantastic restaurant. So thank you to ABBA for today, and next week, Matt, we're going to do... We don't know yet. So if you would like it to be your restaurant group, or you've got an idea for a restaurant group you would like us to cover, just let us know in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for listening to the Menu Mix today. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.